In a paper mill facility, a worker was performing inspection or maintenance checks on a roller mechanism when his hand became caught in the rotating equipment. The powerful rollers immediately pulled his hand deeper into the machine and drawing his entire arm into the machinery in a fatal entanglement. This incident clearly demonstrates the catastrophic dangers of working on or near operating machinery without proper lockout procedures. Workers must never reach into or near rotating rollers, conveyor nip points, or moving machinery components during operation. At a store's loading bay, a worker was taking a brake position near the loading dock when a delivery truck began reversing into the loading dock for unloading operations. The truck driver was completely unaware of the worker's presence in the area and crushed the worker between the truck's rear end and the loading dock structure. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal dangers of inadequate communication, blind spot hazards, and workers positioning themselves in vehicle travel paths. Loading docks must have designated safe zones marked clearly where personnel can stand away from vehicle backing paths. In front of a construction supply store, children were playing unsupervised around cardboard boxes. One child placed a box over his friend while lying on the ground, completely hiding from view. A delivery truck drove through the area and ran directly over the concealed child, with the driver completely unaware that a person was underneath the box. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal dangers of unsupervised children in commercial and industrial areas, and the limitations of driver visibility around ground-level obstacles. Children must never be allowed to play in loading zones, parking areas, or anywhere vehicles operate. At an elevated highway construction site, workers were performing their regular duties when the entire structure suddenly collapsed catastrophically, without warning, pancaking downward and burying workers in the debris. This incident clearly demonstrates the devastating consequences of structural engineering failures, inadequate shoring systems, or premature formwork removal during major construction projects. All elevated structures require comprehensive engineering design, calculations verifying load capacity, and proper temporary support systems throughout construction phases. In an appliance warehouse, workers engaged in horseplay using a forklift to carry a co-worker who was lying on top of a box. They drove around the facility while raising the makeshift platform with their colleague on it. When the forklift elevated the load higher, the box became unstable and tipped over, throwing the worker off and causing him to be struck by a metal frame as he fell. This incident clearly demonstrates the catastrophic consequences of workplace horseplay and grossly negligent misuse of equipment. At a construction site, workers were backfilling and compacting soil beneath an unstable wall structure when it suddenly collapsed. The falling masonry and structural components crushed multiple workers who were positioned directly beneath and adjacent to the failing wall. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal consequences of working near improperly braced structures and inadequate temporary support systems during construction. All walls, trenches, and vertical structures require proper shoring, bracing, and engineering verification before workers can safely operate nearby. At a printing shop flooded by stormwater, workers remained inside the building attempting to secure materials and equipment when the water-saturated floor suddenly gave way catastrophically. The structural collapse caused the entire building to fail, bringing down walls, ceilings, and floors with the workers still inside. This incident clearly demonstrates the fatal dangers of remaining in flood-damaged structures and the catastrophic effects of water infiltration on building integrity. Flooded buildings must be immediately evacuated, as standing water adds tremendous weight that can exceed floor load capacities and compromise foundations. Outside an air conditioning facility, workers were using a crane to load a large AC unit onto a delivery truck. As the unit was suspended over the truck bed, the crane cables failed under the excessive weight, and the heavy equipment plummeted downward, nearly crushing a worker positioned below, who narrowly escaped being crushed by the falling unit. This incident clearly demonstrates the catastrophic consequences of exceeding crane capacity and inadequate rigging for heavy loads again. In the loading area behind a market, a worker was removing covers from stacked fruit crates inside a delivery truck when one entire stack suddenly tumbled over. It struck a worker who was walking past the truck at that moment, knocking him down. This incident clearly demonstrates the dangers of improperly stacked or secured cargo and inadequate awareness of pedestrian traffic near unloading operations. All stacked materials must be stable, interlocked, and secured to prevent shifting or collapse during transport and handling. In a residential neighborhood, a garbage man was loading household garbage into his collection truck when something inside it suddenly exploded with force, ejecting debris in all directions. The worker quickly retrieved a fire extinguisher from the truck and successfully suppressed the fire before it spread further. This incident clearly demonstrates the extreme hazards of improper household waste disposal and the dangers sanitation workers face from prohibited materials and trash. Residents commonly discard hazardous items like lithium batteries, aerosol cans, propane cylinders, and flammable liquids in regular garbage, creating explosion and fire risks when compressed. At a construction site, an excavator operator was digging wet soil when the machine's bucket accidentally struck a worker who was positioned inside the excavated area. Fortunately, the worker was wearing a hard hat, which absorbed the impact and prevented a potentially fatal head injury from the heavy equipment strike. This incident clearly demonstrates the critical dangers of workers entering unprotected excavations and inadequate In a mining operation, workers frantically shoveled heavy soil to rescue a co-worker who had been buried and compacted underneath a soil collapse. The rescue team worked urgently to excavate the trapped worker, and after significant effort, they successfully extracted him alive from the burial. This incident clearly demonstrates the life-threatening dangers of inadequate ground support and the critical importance of immediate rescue response in a mining cave-in. Ground conditions must be assessed continuously by competent persons, and workers must never enter unsupported or unstable areas. In a warehouse facility, workers were relocating tall scaffolding structures to a new position when one scaffold became unstable, tipped over, and collapsed directly onto one of the workers, crushing him beneath the falling framework. This incident clearly demonstrates the severe dangers of moving assembled scaffolding and inadequate stability during relocation operations. Tall scaffolds have high centers of gravity, making them extremely unstable during movement, and especially on uneven surfaces. Workers must never position themselves where falling scaffolds could strike them during relocation attempts. At a tank manufacturing facility, a worker was performing tasks atop a water tank while standing on an elevated platform. He stepped too far to the side, lost his footing, and fell from it. As he fell, he became entangled in electrical cables carrying live current, suffering possible electrocution that rendered him unconscious. Co-workers witnessed the incident, but approached unsure how to safely rescue him from the energized cables. This incident clearly demonstrates multiple critical failures, including inadequate fall protection, unguarded electrical hazards, and insufficient emergency response training. All workers at heights require proper fall protection, including guardrails, personal fall arrest systems, or safety nets.